A faint glow shimmered across the endless cityscape of Coruscant, and though the planet-wide metropolis was as brilliant as ever beneath the swirling traffic lanes and innumerable spires, a subtle restlessness lay upon the atmosphere. In this era of the High Republic, the Jedi had long stood as beacons of hope and justice. Their mission was magnanimous, their spirits bold, and their philosophy well codified. Most conflicts had been relegated to outlying systems or resolved through diplomacy before they spiraled into tragedies. Yet even in such prosperous times, the Force whispered a warning that only the most attuned could discern. There were rumors of disturbances across the Outer Rim, tremors of darkness that the Jedi, in their golden age, hardly believed possible. For centuries, the Sith had supposedly been vanquished, their malevolence extinguished so thoroughly that mention of them brought only cautionary tales in the temple's archives. But currents of the Force often flowed in cyclical patterns, and an ancient presence began to stir anew. High above Coruscant's glistening towers, a group of Jedi Masters gathered in a secure chamber, far removed from the day-to-day bureaucracy of the Republic. The circular room was lit by golden sconces, and in the center, a holographic star map displayed the frontier worlds near the galactic rim. Grand Master Satorian Hell, an Ithorian with a gentle curve to his elongated neck, stepped around the map with measured calm. His large, contemplative eyes swept over the gathering of Jedi Masters, each representing the far reaches of the Republic's guardians. While many found the Ithorian's manner soothing, they could also sense his growing concern. "It is not yet confirmed," he said softly, his dual Ithorian voice resonating across the walls. "But we have received multiple reports of unusual gatherings on Teratus and Mondalene. Investigations into these claims remain inconclusive, yet I sense in the Force that something is amiss. Anger and fear swirl in the currents around these locations. They feel heavier than the usual criminal activity." Master Lianzo Har, an elderly human with silver braids that fell past her shoulders, nodded. "This is no time for complacency. We must send Jedi to investigate these rumors discreetly. Our history may show the Sith were defeated, but we cannot let legends lull us into ignorance. Darkness can arise in many forms, not only under the mantle of the Sith." They spoke with an undercurrent of urgency. In times past, the Jedi Council might have dismissed such talk as overcautious. Yet an inexplicable tension had gripped the hearts of many. It was like the subdued hush before a galactic storm, and even the most optimistic of the High Republic's guardians could not shake the feeling of incipient danger. A resolution was swiftly reached. Jedi teams would be dispatched to the Outer Rim to conduct quiet inquiries. They would seek out rumored warlords, criminal syndicates, or any groups rumored to be dabbling in arcane or forbidden knowledge. With the shining starlight beacon as their symbol of unity, the Jedi would ensure this threat, if it truly existed, never rooted itself in the galaxy. While the Council made preparations, a ship sailed through hyperspace toward a remote system. It was an elegant vessel, the hull painted in the pearly white typical of diplomatic crafts from the Midrim. The pilot, a venerable female Jedi Knight named Asha Vendon, traveled alongside her Padawan, Rin Starwind, a young man with spiky brown hair who displayed enthusiasm that sometimes stretched into impatience. They had been tasked with investigating strange sightings of robed figures on the planet Mondalene. Whispers spoke of a clandestine cult. The mission was to gather information, consult with local authorities, and measure the Force's undercurrents in that region. If there was any truth to the rumors about dark side practitioners, Asha intended to report back so the Order could respond immediately. Rin peered out the cockpit window, watching the streaks of light swirl. "Master," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity, "do you believe these rumors truly suggest a revival of the Sith, or is the Council merely being cautious? I've read the stories about them, but I thought the Sith's downfall was absolute." Asha's grayish-blue eyes flicked toward her Padawan. Her presence was calm as a still pond, reflective of years of Jedi discipline. Yet there was a heaviness in her tone. "In times of peace, complacency grows," she began. "The Sith are not easily vanquished. Their teachings survived in shadows for millennia, always searching for a way back into the light. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. The cult we're investigating might be no more than a group of zealots toying with legends they barely comprehend. Still, we remain vigilant. The Force has guided us here for a reason." Rin pressed his lips together and nodded. The thought of facing some elusive darkness excited him, even though he was taught to resist such emotional surges. Truth be told, he savored the idea of living through an epic-making challenge. But he kept these sentiments to himself, aware that a Padawan's flamboyant eagerness was not always appreciated. When their ship emerged from hyperspace, the swirling tapestry of stars gave way to Mondaline's pale surface, ringed by an atmosphere tinted faintly emerald from certain algae in its large oceans. The planet orbited a white sun, and its continents were dotted with both sprawling farmland and isolated industrial sectors. This was not a world known for political intrigue, nor was it a commercial hub. If trouble festered here, it had chosen a suitably nondescript location to avoid immediate detection. They landed near a modest starport in Mondaline's northern hemisphere. There was a crispness to the air, and the local law enforcement offices were housed in squat buildings of pale stone. Asha and Rin descended the ship's ramp, greeted by a mild breeze that carried the scent of farmland. They were welcomed by a local official named Garo Fallas, a tall, broad-shouldered man with pragmatic eyes. He escorted them to a small transport speeder, from which they could drive out to the nearby town rumored to harbor secret gatherings. As they traveled along rustic roads, Garo explained how farmers and fishermen alike had reported seeing hooded figures conducting midnight rituals, accompanied by flickering lights in the sky. Livestock had vanished. A few unfortunate travelers had been found unconscious near ancient ruins, claiming to have been assaulted by unknown assailants chanting in an unfamiliar language. Though none of it was conclusive evidence of anything as sinister as the Sith, these signs hinted at the presence of individuals dabbling in some brand of the dark arts. Rin's eyes roamed over the scenery while his ears attended Garo's details. The Padawan sensed an undercurrent of unease in the Force, as if the planet itself shivered beneath the gentle sunlight. Asha, too, could feel subtle ripples in the Force's tapestry, a heaviness that occasionally constricted her breath. Without discussing it openly, Master and Padawan both knew they were treading closer to something intangible yet potent, a gloom that quietly permeated these remote settlements. At the heart of the rumor was a battered stronghold that once belonged to an ancient warlord. Though centuries had passed, the local inhabitants often avoided it, deeming it cursed land. The Jedi's intention was simple: investigate the site, see if anyone was using it for illicit purposes, and ascertain the extent of their threat. Asha and Rin planned to do so under the cover of twilight, after quietly gathering more intelligence in the nearby town. They arrived as dusk fell on the town's modest streets. Warm lamplights glowed from windows, and the marketplace was a tangle of stalls selling produce and handmade crafts. Asha politely excused herself from Garo Fallas, suggesting that they would make discreet inquiries on their own. "We'll meet again at dawn," she said, "if the Force wills it." A gentle courtesy, but one laced with the knowledge that danger might lurk in the darkness. Their first stop was a humble inn. The walls were plastered with local paintings, and a single musician plucked softly at a stringed instrument in the corner. Asha and Rin took a small table and ordered a simple meal, listening for gossip. Village folk rarely hid their woes when strangers came in robed attire, especially if they recognized them as Jedi. And soon enough, they gathered that, indeed, some group had taken up residence in the old fortress. Lights flickered across the ruins at night, and eerie chanting sometimes echoed down into the valley. A local farmhand insisted that monstrous shapes roamed the perimeter at midnight, though whether he had seen illusions or had too much local ale, neither Asha nor Rin could be certain. They wasted no time once the local star slipped beyond the horizon. Guided by their keen senses in the Force, they walked the path toward the crumbling stronghold. A cold wind swayed the tall grass. Rin felt his pulse quicken. He tried to maintain the calmness taught to him, to let the Force flow through him without impediment, but anticipation still bubbled beneath the surface. His lightsaber, though unignited, felt reassuring at his belt. Asha, on the other hand, strode with measured resolve, her hand occasionally flicking to ensure her cloak wouldn't snag on the brush. She wore an expression of quiet concentration, her senses directed outward. When they arrived, the fortress seemed a wraith of its former self. Walls broken in places, ramparts crumbled, but torchlight glowed from the central courtyard. Stealthily, the two Jedi slipped between collapsed arches, pressing themselves against mossy stone until the chanting reached their ears. Low, guttural words rolled over the wind, and the force resonated with a faint but discernible darkness that made the fine hairs at the back of Rin's neck stand on end. They peered around a corner and saw a robed figure leading an assembly of perhaps a dozen individuals, each wearing a mask shaped vaguely like a snarling beast. Their chant was accompanied by the pungent aroma of incense. In the center, a battered stone pillar was etched with archaic runes. Dark energies crackled along the edges of the relic. The lead figure raised his arms, revealing hands pale as bones. The swirling air around them seemed charged with menacing potential. Though these people might not be full-fledged Sith, their actions suggested they were either guided or manipulated by the dark side in ways more potent than idle curiosity. Asha and Rin exchanged a glance. Neither needed words to communicate the risk. The last thing they wanted was a confrontation with uncertain foes. Gathering intelligence was paramount, so they separated to flank the crowd from different angles. The chanting rose in intensity, culminating in an unsettling hiss that sent a chill through the courtyard. Suddenly, the robed leader lifted his hood, revealing a face marked by ceremonial tattoos and sallow cheeks. His eyes gleamed with a yellowish tint. The force responded to his presence like a subdued quake of darkness. This man, or being, was not simply dabbling. He was channeling energies reminiscent of the Sith. A presence this tainted by the dark side was more than a local cult leader messing with forbidden texts. Rin's heart thundered. He touched his lightsaber, half expecting his master to give the signal to intervene. But Asha held off. She wanted more information. Then, without warning, the leader cast a swirling bolt of red-hued energy into the air, sending a wave of raw force that flared outward. It spread like a tide, and though it was not powerful enough to kill, it certainly was enough to knock the hidden Jedi off balance. Rin stumbled, his cover compromised. Asha flattened herself against the stone, letting the surge pass overhead. She watched in dismay as the robed acolytes suddenly turned their attention to where Rin had faltered. The chanting broke, replaced by alarmed shouts. The leader's eyes narrowed, and he spoke in a harsh, guttural language that Rin did not recognize. But the command in that voice was clear: find the intruder. Through the flickering torchlight, four acolytes rushed forward, brandishing crude, double-bladed staves crackling with faint red energy. They were not conventional lightsabers, but rather archaic designs powered by red crystals or twisted alchemical energy. In that moment, Asha sprang from the shadows, igniting her green blade with a snap hiss that announced the Jedi's presence. The cultists recoiled momentarily, uncertain of the skill they faced. Rin let out a breath and activated his own lightsaber, its youthful glow a brilliant blue. "Master," he called, stepping back to position himself at her flank. The robed leader sneered, baring a row of crooked teeth. His voice dripped with contempt as he uttered, "So the Jedi have come to meddle in affairs that do not concern them. Your presence here was foretold in the texts. You will not halt what must be done." Asha's grip tightened. "Darkness never remains hidden," she said firmly. "The Jedi will not allow you to spread fear on Mandalene. Disperse now, and you may yet be spared. Continue, and we will have no choice but to stop you." A wave of malicious laughter rippled through the cultists, a fanatic edge creeping into their voices. "It is you who know nothing," one of them retorted. "Our master's revival is inevitable. The galaxy shall learn the name of Tyrannus Shkal once again." At that name, Rin felt the force tingle in alarm. He had never heard of Tyrannus Shkal in his studies. Yet the dreaded hush that fell upon the courtyard suggested that the individual in question was no mere fable. The robed leader raised his arms, chanting once more, and a swirl of red lightning crackled around his fingertips. "Drive them out," he roared. "The darkness must not be disturbed." Battle broke out in a chaotic storm of sparks and swirling cloaks. Asha and Rin found themselves outnumbered. The fanatics fought with reckless abandon, their unnatural staffs hissing with each strike. They lacked formal training, but the dark side fueled their aggression, rendering them dangerously unpredictable. Asha parried blows with masterful elegance, guiding the force through her precise movements to disarm or incapacitate her foes. Rin, though adept, was still learning. Adrenaline coursed through him as he tried to recall each lesson about measured strikes and subtle footwork. Despite the cultists' unrefined techniques, their sheer ferocity tested him. The robed leader surveyed the skirmish from behind the pillar, chanting in an ancient dialect that caused the runes on the stone to glow. Bolts of crimson energy began lancing out from the relic, sizzling the air with an acrid stench. Asha realized that allowing whatever ritual they performed to continue unchecked was far too dangerous. Evading one cultist's reckless swing, she used the force to push her assailant off balance, then dashed toward the leader. Rin, pinned down by multiple opponents, felt a flare of worry for his master, but he knew better than to allow distractions to disrupt his own focus. He deflected a savage slash and drove his lightsaber into the cultist's staff, rendering it useless. The masked figure snarled in pained surprise as the energy sputtered, leaving the staff's tip to fizzle out. Meanwhile, Asha reached the robed leader. Their eyes locked, and before she could speak, he unleashed a torrent of dark energy that clashed against her outstretched hand. She absorbed the brunt of it, letting the force cushion the blow, but the effort drew beads of sweat on her brow. The leader chuckled, malice dripping from his voice. "You think you can defeat powers beyond your comprehension?" he hissed, calling upon the swirling darkness that emanated from the relic. "I defeat that which feeds on fear," Asha said, her jaw set. With a two-handed grip, she swept her green blade in an arc intended to break his focus. He responded by pulling a short, red-hued lightsaber from within his robes, blocking her strike. Their blades crackled upon impact. A wave of primal ferocity rolled from him, and Asha recognized the skill behind his movements. This was no misguided amateur. He fought with disciplined aggression reminiscent of Sith forms she had only read about in ancient texts. Blow after blow, the courtyard lit up with the vibrant clash of sabers. The robed leader pressed Asha back, matching her fluid style with cunning counters. She dug deeper into the force, calling upon her serenity and clarity. She was not alone. Rin, having subdued his opponents, hurled himself forward to assist. The two Jedi combined their efforts, but the leader proved frustratingly resilient, his stamina fueled by the dark side. Finally, with a united surge of the force, they managed to yank his saber from his hand and deliver a jarring push that slammed him against a crumbling statue. He spat blood, eyes flaring with a hatred that felt ancient. Before they could subdue him, he uttered an incantation, reached into his robes, and crushed a small talisman in his hand. The air shimmered with a sudden vortex of swirling power, and the rest of the cultists, seeing their leader's action, retreated in haste. A swirling red mist enveloped them. Asha and Rin braced themselves against the gale, their robes flapping in the violent wind. When the mist cleared, the courtyard was empty save for a trace of scorched ground and the stench of sulfur. The cultists had vanished, teleported or otherwise spirited away by dark energies, leaving behind a realm that felt strangely hollow. At that moment, a tremor rippled through the force. Asha felt it as a lancing pain behind her eyes, and Rin nearly doubled over from the sense of something vile passing them by. The battered stone pillar cracked, releasing a final hiss of malevolent energy. The runes flickered and died. Then all was silent. The only sound was the distant whistle of the wind among the shattered ramparts. The Jedi found themselves alone in the aftermath, hearts pounding, minds racing. Asha lowered her lightsaber, turning to her Padawan with a concerned gaze. "They mentioned Tyrannus Shkal," she said, still catching her breath. "If that name is associated with the Sith, or a Sith cult, this is far worse than we imagined." Rin nodded, struggling to calm his own breathing. Master, the power he wielded, felt ancient like an echo of something primal. "We need to inform the council immediately," she agreed, The final flickers of that malevolence pulsed in the Force, reminding them how close they had come to a deeper tragedy. Whatever ritual had been conducted, it was but a test, a preliminary stepping stone to something larger. If a new agent of the Sith was truly rising, the High Republic's protective shell of peace would be threatened in ways unseen for centuries. By dawn, they had returned to the town to speak with Garo Fallas and ensure the area's safety. It seemed that without their leader, the cultists' presence had diminished, leaving only scorched ruins and trembling villagers. Asha and Rin assured Garo that the immediate threat had passed but warned him that vigilance was crucial. The Jedi planned to depart as soon as possible to convey their findings to the temple on Coruscant. The time for half measures was over. The Jedi needed to confront the possibility that the Sith or some iteration of their dark creed was returning. Their journey back felt somber. Even the starfields in hyperspace appeared subdued. Upon reaching Coruscant, they promptly delivered a full report to the Council. Grand Master Satorian Hell listened intently, his Ithorian features twisting in concern. The mention of Tyrannus Shkal brought hushed exclamations among the gathered masters. Quickly, archival research was carried out. Old texts described a Sith Lord named Tyrannus Shkal, believed to have been destroyed 1,000 years prior. Known for his devotion to experimental rituals aimed at preserving consciousness beyond death, Shkal had vanished without a trace. The notion that someone or a group might attempt to resurrect or channel his essence was nothing short of alarming. Word spread among the Jedi ranks. Across the galaxy, knights and masters began scouring remote worlds, searching for hints of this dark resurgence. Even the most complacent of the High Republic's guardians sensed the shift. Like the slow accumulation of thunderheads on the horizon, the once bright era now saw its first true test in many generations. Whispers of a threat that should have been extinct echoed through temple halls. The council convened in an emergency session. The gathering took place in a larger hall than usual, draped in subdued lighting that reflected the seriousness of the matter at hand. Masters from distant outposts joined via hologram, their forms flickering among the physical seats that ringed the room's circular space. Grand Master Satorian Hell stood in the center, nodding solemnly to each participant. "We must acknowledge that we do not fully understand the threat yet," Satorian Hell announced, his dual Ithorian voice echoing across the hall. "But we must not underestimate it. If the Sith are truly returning, or if some group has discovered their secrets, the consequences are dire." Master Lianzo Har rested her chin on her hand. The teachings of the Jedi emphasize compassion, peace, and defense. The High Republic has allowed us to focus on building rather than fighting. We must remain true to these values, but the question arises: do we require a shift in how we prepare ourselves, how we guard our minds against the encroaching darkness? Her words triggered a vigorous discussion. Some believed that the Jedi Order's traditional approach, centered on harmony, negotiation, and measured response, was sufficient. They argued that vigilance, combined with reaffirming the Jedi Code, would prevent the dark side from gaining traction. Others contended that the galaxy's landscape had evolved, and the Jedi might need to adopt new methodologies, perhaps more proactive intelligence work, deeper study of ancient Sith lore, or advanced training in combat forms that had been largely neglected in the centuries of relative peace. Master Talvin Jader, a Mirialan, shifted forward in his seat. "We have grown comfortable in our current practices," he remarked. "Yet history teaches us that the Sith often emerge at our points of greatest comfort. Perhaps we must revisit knowledge long locked away in the archives to understand our enemy's ways." Another master frowned. "We risk flirting with the very darkness we aim to quell," she warned. "Learning from Sith texts can be dangerous, even for well-disciplined Jedi." The debate wove back and forth, with no easy resolution. Eventually, Grand Master Satorian Hell raised a hand for silence. "We cannot presume to find a perfect solution overnight. For now, we will form a specialized task force, knights and masters with a variety of skills. Their mission will be to seek out any pockets of this potential Sith resurgence, investigate rumors, and if necessary, defend against direct threats. Meanwhile, we will instruct the entire Order to remain vigilant and to strengthen their connections to the light side of the Force." We are Jedi, guardians of peace and justice. Regardless of how we proceed, we must act in accordance with our vows. Yet, let us remain open to the possibility that the tradition we know may need to adapt. Thus was born the High Council's first official recognition that the Jedi Order might need a new approach. A momentous shift was beginning, though few realized the magnitude of what lay ahead. The Specialized Task Force, informally referred to as the Celestial Watch, comprised a blend of experienced masters, knights with unique skill sets, and even a few inquisitive Padawans assigned to learn directly from the front lines. Asha Vendon was among those invited, as her recent encounter offered valuable insight into the threat. Rin Starwind, too, was included, despite some reservations from more conservative members who felt a Padawan's presence could be a liability. But Asha insisted that Rin's determination and sensitivity to the Force would prove an asset, so the Council acquiesced. New tensions arose within the Jedi Temple. Some masters feared that too many Jedi, eager for adventure, might volunteer for the task force simply to taste conflict. Others believed that ignoring the threat would be a grave oversight. Meanwhile, scattered rumors trickled in from other Rim worlds. Tales of robed figures, haunted ruins, missing persons, and bizarre phenomena involving red-hued energies grew more frequent. Each lead was meticulously cataloged and prioritized. To make matters worse, the Republic Senate was also hearing of these dark rumors. Senators from frontier worlds demanded protection, while more skeptical voices decried such claims as sensationalized ghost stories. The Chancellor at that time, an amiable Celestin named Oriv Var, tried to maintain calm. He assured the Senate that the Jedi were handling the situation with their usual competence. Yet behind the scenes, Oriv pressed the Jedi Council for updates, anxious to quell any threat that might destabilize the expansion initiatives of the High Republic. The Celestial Watch members gathered in a secure wing of the temple. The wide training hall bore a polished floor and tall columns, each inlaid with mosaic renditions of great Jedi achievements. A giant tapestry depicting the Force as swirling streams of light and dark hung along the far wall. Under that solemn watch, Master Lianzo Har, Master Talvin Jader, Asha Vendon, and several others convened for a briefing. In the center stood a rotating holographic display of the galaxy's outer rim. Asha addressed the group. We have reports of at least 5 separate sites where cult-like behavior has been observed, each referencing Tyrannus Shkal or brandishing symbols identical to known Sith iconography. The largest group appears to be on Tyrannus, another on Ionias, and a third rumored near the Crystal Rift. We must coordinate carefully. Master Talvin Jader pointed to Tyrannus on the map, a harsh desert planet with rumored underground enclaves, perfect for secret gatherings. We'll need more than a small infiltration team if we're to uncover anything extensive. The local climate alone is treacherous. From the sidelines, Rin listened closely. He noticed a flicker of worry behind his master's eyes, a reflection of the severity of what they faced. He resolved to train even harder, to become the Jedi that could stand firm against these dark manifestations. For the first time, he sensed the enormity of a threat that might surpass the comfortable paradigms of the High Republic. Within days, the Celestial Watch prepared to depart. They divided into multiple subgroups, each heading for a different suspected nexus of dark side activity. Asha and Rin would lead a small squad to Tyrannus, while Master Talvin Jader would investigate Ionias. Another pair of knights set off for the Crystal Rift. The other suspected sites had watchers assigned to them, Jedi who would monitor for increased activity but refrain from direct action unless necessary. As Asha's group left Coruscant behind, the approach to Tyrannus felt like a plunge into the unknown. The planet was harsh, lacking a fully functioning starport. They had to land near a scrap town on the edge of a vast desert, battered by relentless winds. Tall, rocky spires jutted from the sands like bleached bones, offering minimal respite from the scorching sun. Despite the adversity, local inhabitants eked out an existence by scavenging or operating small moisture farms. Rumor had it that beneath the surface were cavernous networks, some leading to an ancient temple believed to predate even the Old Republic. The team established a makeshift base in a cluster of abandoned structures. While the other Jedi, Some knights, a few Padawans, set up perimeter sensors. Asha and Rin ventured into the settlement to gather information. The presence of Jedi robes attracted stares from dusty-faced locals. Many had never seen a Jedi in person, yet they had heard rumors of Force wielders. Some looked upon them with hope, others with suspicion. Asha approached a weathered human named Momir, who oversaw the only modest watering hole in town. He was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually revealed that in recent months, travelers wearing black robes and brandishing strange weapons had passed through, heading deep into the desert. Some never returned, but occasionally new acolytes arrived, fueled by whispered promises of power or wealth. Night fell, and the desert sky glittered with uncountable stars. The wind battered the makeshift camp, rattling the durasteel panels. Rin sat cross-legged, meditating to center himself. He recalled how Master Yoda, an even more ancient figure than most of the council, though not yet as legendary, always emphasized that fear was the path to the dark side. Now, the swirling unknown in his mind tested his resilience. He breathed, letting the Force wash over him until a calm settled in his core. Asha quietly observed her apprentice from a short distance. She sensed his anxiety but also his determination. The bond they shared through the Force was steady, a reminder that neither of them stood alone. That thought bolstered her as well, for she felt the intangible weight of every step forward in this quest. When dawn broke, they set out across the shifting dunes, guided by local leads and the tenuous pull of the Force. The journey was arduous. The sun bore down relentlessly, the sand shifting beneath their boots. After hours of travel, they reached a jagged canyon wall where the footprints of multiple travelers led toward a crevice. 2 knights remained behind to guard the speeders, while Asha, Rin, and a Mirialan Padawan named Karana pressed into the darkness. The canyon opened into a cavern that spiraled downward, lined with stone carvings that spoke of an earlier civilization. The designs featured images of robed figures worshipping an ominous entity. Though the script was foreign, the swirling sense of malevolence that accompanied the carvings was unmistakable. As they pressed deeper, the rocky walls gave way to ancient corridors. Faded glyphs covered every surface, and an oppressive atmosphere reigned. It was as though the dark side had seeped into the very stone, clinging to centuries of hidden rituals. Each step they took echoed ominously. Eventually, they stumbled upon a vast chamber illuminated by flickering braziers. Hooded figures stood in concentric circles, chanting in unison. At the center, a dark-robed individual loomed over a dais decorated with red crystals. The crystals pulsed like hearts, feeding off the ambient energy. The Jedi hid behind an outcropping, scanning the gathering. It was larger than they feared, maybe 30 or more cultists. Their voices combined in a chanting that raised goosebumps on Rin's arms. The robed leader on the dais wore a mask forged in the shape of a skull, though from the eye slits, a sinister gold glow spilled forth. In his hands, he clutched a tattered holocron, faintly shimmering with the same malignant aura. From the hushed texts they had studied, it was recognized as a Sith holocron. No doubt about it now, this was indeed a node of the dark side's reemergence. Quietly, Asha motioned to Rin and Karana to retreat so they could regroup with the rest of the team. But it was too late. The chanting stopped, and the masked leader tilted his head as if sensing their presence. "We have visitors," he announced in a dry rasp that resonated throughout the chamber. "Come forth, Jedi. There is no place for you to hide." A prickle of warning blared in Rin's mind. Asha took a slow breath, then nodded to her companions. "We must face them," she whispered. Together, they stepped from the shadows, lightsabers unlit but at the ready. The cultists parted like an ominous sea, forming a corridor that led to the dais. The masked leader watched them approach, silent except for the faint hiss of his breath through the mask's grill. "You who meddle in secrets beyond your understanding," he said, mocking them with every syllable. "We stand on the threshold of a new dawn. Tyrannus Shkal's essence stirs in these very halls, and soon our master will rise. The High Republic is not prepared for his return." Asha made a measured approach. You toy with forces that breed suffering. The Sith ideology died for a reason, she retorted, her voice echoing off the cavern walls. End this ceremony. Surrender, and we may yet find a path to redemption for those who have been misled. If you refuse, you endanger not just yourselves, but all of Taratus. Mocking laughter rippled through the cultists. The masked leader raised the holocron, channeling dark power. We do not need your mercy, he said. A swirl of crimson energy danced around his form, intensifying the oppressive aura within the chamber. We only need your blood to feed the ritual. The tension fractured. Cultists surged forward, brandishing wicked weapons or channeling bursts of force energy twisted by hatred. Asha ignited her saber, green light casting stark shadows on the walls. Karana, with a determined glare, activated her yellow blade. Rin followed suit, his heart pounding, but his focus honed by every ounce of training he had. The two Padawans braced themselves, aware that the cultists outnumbered them. Asha took point, blocking and parrying with lethal efficiency, weaving the force through her movements. The battle roared to life in a tempest of unbridled intensity. Asha's blade spun with measured grace, slicing through crude pikes crackling with red sparks. Karana faced two robed acolytes, matching their aggression with sharp counters. Rin found himself locked against a broad-shouldered zealot whose staff weapon glowed with ephemeral red edges. Each swing was heavy, forcing Rin to rely on agility and footwork to evade. A swirling wave of malevolent force energy crashed over him, nearly sending him sprawling, but he clung to the light side, inhaling a deep breath to steady his resolve. With renewed concentration, he sidestepped a savage blow and spun low, severing the staff's tip. The acolyte hissed, grabbing a dagger from within his robe, only to be knocked unconscious by a well-placed telekinetic push. Amid the chaos, the masked leader chanted words that crackled with arcane power. The crystals on the dais glowed fiercely. A swirling vortex of energy manifested above him, forming a hideous spiral of black and red that pulsed with the heartbeat of the dark side. Asha sensed the shift immediately. This ritual was more than a display. It was an attempt to call forth something vile, perhaps the very spirit of Taranis Shkal. If it succeeded, their presence here might only feed the resurrection. We must stop him, she shouted to Rin and Karana. She advanced on the dais, but a half-dozen cultists threw themselves in her path, screaming fanatical vows. Rin and Karana rushed to assist, their blades a blur of color. Despite the best efforts of the Jedi, the masked leader continued his incantation, voice rising in pitch until the cavern itself vibrated. A wave of invisible power flung Asha and the others back. The masked leader pressed the holocron to his chest, a keening wail filling the space. Rin struggled to rise, half-dazed, as a swirling silhouette began to form in the vortex. It loomed, taller than any normal being, with faint skeletal outlines suggesting a twisted armor. Lightning danced around it, accompanied by a guttural chorus of malevolence. For a moment, Rin felt a terror so profound that he had to fight the urge to recoil. Beside him, Karana also trembled, her lightsaber gripped tightly in both hands. Asha forced herself to her feet, focusing on the light side with every ounce of her willpower. She sensed the presence of something ancient stirring, an echo of a Sith Lord who had once terrorized the galaxy. The masked leader's triumphant posture signaled that the moment of fulfillment was near. Rise, Taranis Shkal, he cried. Feed upon these Jedi and reclaim your rightful place. But something unexpected happened. The swirling silhouette faltered, flickering as if it were struggling to gather enough energy. A tortured growl echoed through the chamber. The masked leader staggered, perhaps realizing that the ritual required more power than the holocron alone provided. Or possibly the presence of the Jedi had introduced an element of resistance that wasn't accounted for. The swirling black-red vortex began to destabilize. Seeing an opening, Asha mustered her strength and lunged forward, hurling her lightsaber in a spinning arc. The blade slashed through the dais, severing the channel of energy to the crystals. Sparks erupted. The masked leader tried to react, but Karana's sudden strike forced him to dodge. Meanwhile, Rin seized the chance to strike at the dais itself with a powerful thrust, harnessing the force to amplify his blow. The structure cracked, sending shards of crystal skittering across the floor. The vortex quavered, then imploded with a thunderous roar, flinging bits of debris in all directions. A deafening silence followed. The swirling silhouette vanished, leaving nothing but a rancid taste in the force. The masked leader, momentarily stunned, clutched the holocron, which now emitted a faint, dying glow. The cultists, seeing their grand ritual fail, began to waver, some dropping to their knees in despair. A few flung themselves at the Jedi in a final frenzy, only to be swiftly subdued. Asha approached the leader, her green blade humming ominously. His mask was cracked, revealing a gaunt face twisted with rage and horror. She reached out with the force to sense his intentions. A swirl of hatred battered her senses. "Your efforts have failed," she said, her voice strangely gentle despite the tension. "Stop this madness and come to the temple for judgment. Perhaps it is not too late to break free from the dark side's hold." He bared his teeth in a mocking grin. "The knowledge has been awoken," he hissed, clutching the fractured holocron. "You cannot unlearn it. Even if we fail, others will succeed. Tyrannus Shkal will return." With a final, desperate lunge, he swung at Asha with a hidden vibroblade. She deftly disarmed him, then used the force to pin him in place, extinguishing her saber to avoid lethal harm. He collapsed, shuddering with rage. Karana moved to restrain him, and Rin exhaled heavily, relief coursing through his trembling Li. While the cultists were disarmed, tied, or subdued, Asha carefully retrieved the broken holocron. Its ominous presence lingered, a testament to the power it once contained. She regarded it with a mixture of caution and pity, then wrapped it in a special container the Jedi used for dark artifacts. Whatever secrets it held would need to be studied by the Order's most experienced archivists. The aftermath of this confrontation brought a somber revelation. Though the immediate threat had been nullified, it was clear that these cultists represented only one cell in a larger movement. The masked leader's final words echoed in Asha's mind, "Even if we fail, others will succeed." It implied that the knowledge of resurrecting Tyrannus Shkal was being spread across multiple enclaves, each possibly working toward the same sinister goal. They had cut off one head of the Hydra, but the beast itself still roamed free. Upon returning to their makeshift base, the Jedi used long-range communications to send a coded message to the temple on Coruscant. The Council responded swiftly with instructions to safeguard the cultists for transport to a secure facility, where they could be interrogated and, if possible, redeemed. The Celestial Watch, scattered across different sites, reported parallel encounters, some more harrowing than others. A pattern emerged, an overarching plan to unify these dark side sects, culminating in a grand ritual to revive or manifest the essence of Tyrannus Shkal. Though none had fully succeeded, each partial attempt grew bolder, suggesting that the conspirators were learning from their failures. In the temple's great archive halls, Master Lianzo Har and Master Talvin Jader pored over Sith manuscripts that had long been locked away. They read about Tyrannus Shkal, how he delved into esoteric rites aimed at transcending mortal limits, forging pacts with arcane entities. The texts described a cunning manipulator who believed immortality could be achieved if enough living beings fueled his resurrection. The last known references indicated that the Jedi of old had disrupted his final ritual and scattered his followers, believing them extinguished. Clearly, they had only delayed the inevitable. As the Order absorbed this knowledge, a profound debate once again roiled beneath the surface. Some Jedi insisted that studying Sith teachings was a dangerous path, one that could corrupt even the most stoic. Others argued that ignorance was the greater threat. If the Jedi refused to understand the nuance of what the cultists were attempting, they might be blindsided by advanced Sith methodologies. For each day that passed, more Jedi found themselves grappling with moral complexities rarely encountered in the High Republic's golden era. The situation forced a subtle yet significant shift in the Jedi's philosophy. Instead of relying exclusively on negotiation and deterrence, the Order began to emphasize a more vigorous approach to defending the Republic. The Celestial Watch symbolized this shift, traveling across the galaxy, investigating hidden enclaves, confronting dark side practitioners before they could grow in strength. These missions were not about conquest, but about prevention, ensuring that the seeds of Sith revival never fully sprouted. A new training regimen emerged. It focused on preparing knights and Padawans alike to detect subtle manipulations of the dark side. Students spent extra hours in the archives, comparing accounts of ancient Sith illusions and mental intrusions. They learned to build stronger mental defenses, forging layers of spiritual fortification that might protect them in the event they encountered illusions or mind control attempts. Lightsaber drills also intensified, covering forms that had fallen out of frequent use since the galaxy's last major wars. This was not a transformation into militaristic zealots, but an acknowledgement that the High Republic's virtue must be backed by robust readiness. Rin Starwind, for his part, found his life changing more rapidly than he could have imagined. Once a curious Padawan who thrilled at the idea of adventure, he now understood the gravitas of his role. Each mission tested his nerves. He found himself diving into ancient tombs, decoding partial texts on the dark side, and forging alliances with local militias who had never before crossed paths with Jedi. Though he still harbored excitement, he recognized that the stakes of this conflict exceeded personal ambition. Each success or failure echoed across countless lives. For Master Asha Vendon, the weight of leadership bore down. She was entrusted with guiding Rin, shaping him into a Jedi who could navigate the precarious line between vigilance and aggression. She also felt responsible for each new Padawan that found themselves drawn into these investigations. She spent her nights reflecting in solitude, wrestling with how to sustain the Jedi's fundamental commitment to compassion and peace while acknowledging the necessity of direct action against encroaching darkness. In quiet moments, she wondered if this new direction was a temporary measure or if the Jedi would forever be changed by this confrontation. As word of these missions spread, the Republic at large looked to the Jedi with a renewed sense of reliance and some trepidation. On the one hand, it reassured citizens that the Jedi had recognized a growing evil and were taking measures to keep it in check. But on the other, more pragmatic minds questioned whether stirring up remnants of Sith knowledge might eventually be more dangerous than letting sleeping devils lie. The Chancellor tried to maintain a careful balance, supporting the Jedi's efforts without allowing fear to overshadow the Republic's continued expansion and scientific progress. Meanwhile, scattered fragments of the cult regrouped in hidden corners of the galaxy. Communication channels buzzed with cryptic updates as certain high-ranking acolytes shared discoveries gleaned from earlier failures. They refined the rituals, searching for methods to gather enough life energy to anchor Tyrannus Shkall's spirit. Rumors spoke of a plan to converge on a planet saturated with the living force, a place that might serve as the perfect crucible for the final ceremony. The Jedi gleaned hints of this plot from captured cultists, but no definitive location surfaced. It was as if the cult was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Yet, as each day passed, the Force itself seemed to quiver with both dread and anticipation. Conflict brewed in hidden lairs and on distant horizons, far from the shining beacons of the core worlds. Jedi who had once believed their primary duty was to mediate trade disputes or quell minor upheavals now found themselves grappling with ancient evils. This demanded a recalibration of their perspectives, a willingness to accept that the Force was more encompassing than they had become accustomed to. Light and dark, forever entwined. In the temple on Coruscant, the gentle hum of the city-planet's skyline offered a serene counterpoint to these ominous developments. Late one evening, Grand Master Satorian Hell stood on a balcony overlooking the endless sprawl of lights. His large Ithorian eyes were pensive. The bustling of traffic below reminded him of the billions of souls who depended on the Jedi to maintain order. He closed his eyes, reaching into the Force to discern its whispers. He felt sorrow, determination, and an undercurrent of dread. The High Republic had once seemed untouchable in its grandeur. But now he understood. Every golden age carries the seeds of its trials. Perhaps the best measure of this era would be how the Jedi responded, whether they could adapt without sacrificing the virtues that made them who they were. In the days and weeks that followed, the Celestial Watch and many other Jedi teams continued their tireless work. They dismantled small cult cells on frontier worlds, disrupted shipments of illegally obtained kyber crystals that might have been used for dark experimentation, and gleaned incremental bits of information about the ultimate plan for Tyrannus Shkal's resurrection. Though progress was made, the sense of finality remained elusive. Each victory felt partial, a short step in a longer dance whose conclusion still lay just out of reach. Within the Order, a cautious optimism grew that perhaps they might prevent a catastrophic emergence. They saw the fracturing of cult cells as evidence that the plan to resurrect Tyrannus Shkal was faltering. Yet a few, notably older and more sagacious masters, warned against complacency. Darkness, especially darkness that had tasted existence through the Sith, was notoriously persistent. The partial summoning attempts, the repeated sightings of illusions and phantasmal apparitions in certain tombs, all hinted that Tyrannus Shkal's spirit lingered near the threshold. A single powerful ritual, if done correctly, could undo all the Jedi's progress. Amid these operations, the philosophical debate within the Order only deepened. Younger Jedi, reared in an era of relative peace, struggled to reconcile the necessary martial edge they were now asked to adopt. Some questioned if the lines between defense and aggression were blurring too far. They recognized that the Jedi's ethos required them to avoid the pitfalls of fear, anger, and hatred. Yet, in confronting an enemy that thrived on those very emotions, they risked being drawn into the vortex. Subtle tensions emerged in training sessions. A Padawan might question why they needed to learn more lethal tactics. A more experienced knight might respond that they must be ready to defend innocence at all costs. Such tensions spilled over one afternoon in a training chamber, where Rin practiced advanced saber techniques with Karana. They found themselves pushing each other harder than usual, fueled by an undercurrent of competitiveness and frustration with the intangible nature of their enemy. Their blades clashed with jarring intensity until Master Asha intervened, sensing the precarious emotional tenor. She carefully reminded them that the line between readiness and aggression was razor-thin. They paused, breathless, shame flickering across their features. This was no time for pride to overshadow prudence. The lesson was clear. In this new era, balancing emotional restraint with necessary strength was the greatest challenge a Jedi faced. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The Jedi uncovered more intelligence that the cultists were quietly converging in the Malacros system, rumored to contain a planet known for potent force nexuses. A reconnaissance team confirmed that large gatherings of robed figures had been spotted entering clandestine structures, possibly built over ancient temples or crypts. Realizing that a major ritual might be imminent, the Council mobilized a larger strike force. This time, they would not settle for infiltration alone. They intended to disrupt the cult's operations conclusively, capturing or defeating their leaders, and putting an end to Tyrannus Shkal's lingering shadow. Amid these preparations, a solemn hush overtook the temple on Coruscant. Knights and masters conferred in small groups, exchanging last-minute advice or heartfelt encouragement. Padawans stood resolute beside their mentors, determined to prove worthy. The looming confrontation would be a decisive test of the High Republic's resilience. Jedi craft departed the planet one by one, gliding into the swirling depths of hyperspace. Each carried a portion of the galaxy's hope. For Asha and Rin, the departure felt weighty. They recalled how only a short time ago, their missions were simple, almost idyllic. Negotiating trade routes, protecting convoys from pirates, advising local governors. Now they embarked on an operation that might shape the future of the Jedi Order. If Tyrannus Shkal's essence was fully summoned, the ramifications could be as devastating as the ancient Sith Wars. But if the Jedi succeeded in permanently shattering his foothold, perhaps the High Republic's golden promise would endure. Yet as they neared the Malacros system, a knot of apprehension coiled in Rin's stomach. He glanced to his master, finding comfort in her calm presence. Asha's focus never wavered. "Do not let fear dictate your actions," she reminded him. "Remember the Force flows through all living things. Draw upon it for clarity, for strength. The darkness cannot stand against unity of purpose and compassion." He nodded, steeling himself, When their craft emerged from hyperspace, they beheld the dusty orb of Malakros Prime, ringed by swirling silver storms. Multiple Jedi ships dotted the orbit. The Celestial Watch conferred by HoloLink, finalizing a plan to land at strategic points, encircle the suspected ritual site, and time their assault so that no cultist cell could slip away unnoticed. It was a delicate operation, requiring precision and synergy, attributes the Jedi prided themselves on. As each ship descended into the planet's churning atmosphere, the Force seemed to thrum with tension. A confrontation was nigh. The new Jedi philosophy, tempered in the fires of a rising Sith threat, would soon be put to its ultimate test. Would the adaptability they had embraced be enough to thwart ancient shadows? Could they preserve the essence of their role as guardians of peace, even as they engaged in direct conflict with unambiguously malevolent forces? The answers lay just beyond the swirling clouds, waiting in the gloom beneath the planet's battered skies. Step by step, the Jedi braced themselves for whatever they might face, hopeful that their unity, wisdom, and unwavering devotion to the light side would prove stronger than any attempt to raise Tyrannus Skull. And in that silent moment before the battle's dawn, the Force carried a gentle promise to all who listened. Every generation of Jedi must confront darkness anew, forging the path that keeps hope alive in the galaxy.